Hey everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us on this Monday. Mary Alice Parks, Deputy Political Director, is here as well. A lot to cover on this day after St. Patrick's Day. Springtime in Washington, the Congress is out, and a lot of attention this week, though, on policy decisions by the Trump administration, specifically with higher education, which we'll get to. Some big developments today for holders of student debt, and also some developments involving the FAA and its regulation of new airplanes. Big business implications there, Mary Alice. And as we learn new details about the investigation over in Ethiopia with the crash of Flight 302, we're also starting to get a clearer picture of perhaps what some critics are calling too cozy a relationship between the FAA and plane maker Boeing.
And we've seen this with other agencies and other regulations in the past. When there's a big disaster, the American people start to tune in and are shocked to learn that big business is often in charge of sort of regulating itself. The government will come back and say, we just don't have the time or the resources or the expertise to do some of this regulation. And that's where you get into some of those complicated budget fights about what sort of resources are needed to make sure there's government oversight of safety.
And certainly a big call right now for a closer examination of that relationship and what safety measures were taken or not taken in this case. As we learned some new details today in the investigation itself, what happened just about a week ago when that 737 MAX 8 went down in Ethiopia just after takeoff. Today, ABC News has learned that the voice data recorder has been verified. The information has been verified on there, and authorities just put out a statement a short time ago saying that they saw, Mary Alice, some similarities in the crash of Flight 302 with the crash of Flight 610, Lion Air 610, which crashed last year in Indonesia, certainly setting us on a course now for a problem with the plane.
Yeah, and that will have big implications for Boeing, obviously a huge company with a lot of employees.
Hey, you're from Washington State.
I'm from Washington State. You know, this is a company with big unions and big order lists. You know, people have bought these planes. They were expecting these planes, so this could have big economic impact down the road.
And our airline analyst, John Nance, I believe, is joining us now live to talk a little bit more about this. John, thanks so much. You can't hear us yet. All right. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of headlines, Mary Alice, that have been popping, not just with this investigation, but also learning now from Bloomberg News that they've uncovered an Inspector General report back to 2012 showing that there is a documented history of coziness between these two airlines, where the FAA has actually given a pass in some cases, according to Bloomberg News, to certification of new products.
Right, and whether or not that's appropriate. You know, these businesses say that they are the ones with the expertise and the resources to know if their products are safe, and I think that all of those relationships are going to be reevaluated now. And
a lot of political implications as well. We know that Congress is closely scrutinizing this, and John Nance is with us now, ABC News airline contributor and analyst, a pilot himself. John Nance, thanks so much for joining us. Want to get your take on this breaking news this afternoon on the word that we're getting now that the flight data recorder has been verified and information showing some similarities between these two crashes in the past year. John, help us understand what those similarities might be.
The similarities, actually, if this is the identical accident, especially, involves a situation where the airplane was getting an erroneous signal that it was climbing too fast and with too high a deck angle. And this thing called an MCAS, which is part of the structure of the algorithm, comes in to save you, so to speak, by giving nose-down trim. It doesn't shove the yoke forward, but it trims the airplane nose down. And you can stop that with either the thumb switch, or what you're really supposed to do is call that a runaway trim. Reach down and turn off two paddle switches and solve the problem. But if this happened exactly the same way as the crash of Lion Air back almost 6 months ago, then this is one of the most egregious things I have really encountered in a long time, because we have two flight crews that would have failed one of the most basic maneuvers in aviation, and that is dealing with a runaway pitch trim.
And that could be a huge problem for this product line that Boeing is rolling out, the most popular plane in the sky, as you know, John. And a lot of conversation here in Washington about the process that the plane and its design went through to be certified, the role the FAA may have played, and that we understand from the Wall Street Journal that a grand jury subpoena was issued just last week in this case to try to get information about that process. What's your view on the role the FAA plays in relating to Boeing. Have they gotten too close?
Well, this is an old debate. It's been going on for a long time with a lot of different airplanes because in order to be able to have a complete arm's length situation between the manufacturer and the FAA would have to hire thousands of really very, very qualified expert people from within industry. And they simply don't have the money to do that, and they don't have the time. And what they've done instead is create a situation called a designated engineering representative, which is an employee of Boeing, for instance, who then puts on his or her FAA hat and inspects the work. Maybe they get a little too close at times, but I certainly have never seen a situation where a grand jury needed to be involved, and I don't know what they're acting on. And let me clarify one thing for you, if I may. When we talk about this accident and it may have an impact on Boeing, let me tell you that there is no rational grounds, or there are no rational grounds for putting these airplanes on the ground just based on the idea that we had two accidents that were of the same cause, which was that the pilots forgot one of the most basic procedures in aviation. In other words, turning those switches off solves the problem. Now, there are other aspects to the problem because there's never just one cause to an aviation accident. And certainly it is appropriate to ask about the certification process. But there's nothing inherently wrong with this airplane.
And it's
a question about, we're talking about the product itself or the pilots, the pilot training. I think we are a long way away from knowing any definitive answers on that.
John Nance, thanks so much for making the effort to join in. John, great to see you as always. Appreciate your insights. Hope to have you back again soon. From America's airline industry now to the auto industry, we turn, Mary Alice, to a fight that the president has picked, or at least reignited, on the verge of his trip to Ohio later this week, this time taking on GM. And the automaker there for closing down Lordstown, Ohio plant. This plant closed just earlier this month. 1,500 people laid off. This is where they made the Chevy Cruze, a small vehicle that they said people weren't buying anymore. The president has sort of ridden in here on Twitter now to try to save the day. Our Jordan Phelps, our White House reporter, has also been covering this. And Jordan, as we see the president's tweet here,
yes.
President's not happy, but it's not clear what he can do to solve the problem.
No, and as Kellyanne Conway said to us today, what we're seeing today is just the businessman president kicking into action, and those are his instincts to get involved here. But Devin, what's really interesting here is this is happening. This is a president who, of course, was elected on the promise of bringing back manufacturing jobs.
Right.
So politically, this is perilous territory for the president, and it's happening in that critical battleground state of Ohio, where the president is trying to go later this week and kind of make this bigger pitch on manufacturing. So the president very much looking to look like he's in control of the situation and fixing things ahead of his re-election coming up.
A lot of this is about optics.
Totally, optics and jobs. He has repeatedly said that he has succeeded in bringing more manufacturing jobs back to this country, and that's still a debate. And there's a constant conversation going on in the states about whether or not this economy is doing as well as the president and Republicans here in D.C. claim it is. There's a stock market that's doing well, but that doesn't mean there aren't still big problems with income inequality and manufacturing jobs.
And of course, the irony in all this is that GM says that part of the reason why it's been struggling in places like Lordstown are because of the president's tariffs on steel imports, which have made it a lot harder for GM to maintain those profit margins. And so, again, not difficult, not easy to see how he's going to solve this one as he heads to Ohio on Wednesday. It's going to be very interesting. Shifting gears a little bit now, though, to an interesting topic that you were covering today, Jordan, and I know, Mary Alice, you've been tracking up on Capitol Hill, and that is the issue of student loan debt. Perhaps you have some debt. We have some numbers for you. The latest figures from the Federal Reserve show a staggering number of students in America have student loan debt. All told, it's over $1.5 trillion. 44 million students leave college in debt, and the average there, as you see, is $37,000. It's been climbing. The average has been climbing every year for the past 18 years. So what are we going to do about it? Jordan, tell us. The Trump administration came out today. They put Ivanka Trump out there to showcase their plan to fix things.
Yeah, so what's new here is we see the Trump administration for the first time really kind of coming out and laying out what they'd like to see done to reform the nation's higher education system. The big headline here is they'd like to put new caps on borrowing. So for parents taking out loans for their students in undergraduate and students taking out loans for graduate degrees. The Republicans on Capitol
want to
Hill.
cap, just to interrupt you there, they want to cap the amount students can borrow. They don't want people going into debt to go to college.
That's exactly right. I mean, they want them to take on some debt, but the argument that Republicans are making here is that by limiting the amount of loans that students can take out, it will force these institutions to lower their tuition costs. You could argue on the other side, of course, that this is just making it harder for students who don't have the means to go to college. But Devin, at the crux of this is that giant issue. We have a generation of Americans now that's straddled with this suffocating student debt, and we're seeing solutions on the liberal side and on the conservative side coming together here and clashing at this issue at the heart of a generation right now.
And Mary Alice, the whole purpose of unveiling this is for the White House to try to nudge Capitol Hill to sort of dust off the Higher Education Act, which has been in place forever, but it hasn't been updated in 10 years. So a lot of these terms governing student loans, school accreditation, other things like that, they haven't been updated with the times. What do you think the appetite is to take this on right now?
Well, what's interesting is there's a big appetite among Democrats. I was struck by how many lines in that press release read like lines that you see in Democrats' press releases these days. Students that are struggling under crippling student loan debt. That's a sentence that that is all over Elizabeth Warren's proposal for debt-free college, Bernie Sanders' proposal for free community college. So this is an issue that both sides of the political spectrum know something has to be done on, because they're hearing that. They're hearing that from voters and families who just do not know what to do with this level of debt. You know, one thing that's really interesting is the federal government does obviously control interest rates around student loans that have already been issued. It'll be important to press the White House on whether it plans on doing anything on that space.
And one former White House official, this one in the Obama administration, joins us live now. James Cavall is president of the Institute for College Access and Success. It's an independent nonprofit group. James, great to see you. You used to work in the education department of the Obama administration. You were very closely familiar with a lot of these issues. What do you make of some of the things Mary Alice was talking about that seem on the surface to have bipartisan support? Do they have your support, the things the Trump administration is unveiling today?
Well, thanks for having me. I think it is great to hear the Trump administration talking about the problems of student debt and recognizing just how large it's gotten. But unfortunately, I don't think the proposals they unveiled today it will take us in the right direction. And it's important to keep in mind, not only are they not talking about more scholarship spending or support for states to keep tuition low, but just last week they put out a budget that cuts student loans by $200 billion over the next decade. So they're talking about a policy agenda that would really increase the cost of college.
And their argument, James, is, help us understand this, that they are also trying to help students with those monthly payments by raising the cap on those to 12.5%. Right now they're 10%, and phasing out that debt after 15 years, I think, for undergraduates, 30 years for graduate students. That sounds like a pretty good deal on paper, but you've argued that actually could make things worse.
Well, it's a bit of a mix. So right now, under current law, students can cap their payments at 10% of their incomes above a living allowance, and any remaining balance is forgiven after 20 years, or if you're in a public service profession, 10 years. What the Trump administration wants to do is raise monthly payments for everyone from 10% to 12.5% of income, and then set the forgiveness period at 15 years for everyone. So some people might come out ahead. Everyone will be paying about a quarter more. Their monthly loan payments will be about a quarter larger, and then some people will be paying longer and others will be paying less long.
And what of the notion that Jordan just illustrated to us, that by capping the amount of debt that students can take on and going to college, as Ivanka Trump argued today, might help drive down the cost of some of these colleges because students simply can't take enough loans out to go to them? Do you think that carries any water?
Well, what they've proposed is capping the amount that parents can borrow and graduate students can borrow. Their proposal has nothing to do with undergraduates, which are, of course, most students in higher education. And the evidence really does not show that the availability of loans has driven up prices, especially at public universities, which is where 3/4 of students go.
What's the silver bullet? Is there one thing you think Congress could take on? If there's one thing you'd like to see Congress take on as part of a reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, what would that number one priority be?
Well, we've asked them to invest more in Pell Grants. That's the scholarship program for low and middle income students. That's the single most important thing that Congress can do to make college more affordable for everyone, help students graduate, and bring down student debt.
All right, great to have your perspective. James Cavall, president of the Institute for College Access and Success, former Obama administration education official. It's great to have your voice, sir. Thanks so much for making the effort to be here in the briefing room.
Thanks for having me.
Shifting gears a little bit now, education, a big topic, Mary Alice, on the campaign trail 2020. We've had a lot of conversation over the past couple of days about the number of candidates out there getting a little bit bigger. I think we're up to 15 now. Give us kind of the big picture state of play. You've been out there.
Actually.
16. All right, stand corrected.
Now include Kristen Gillibrand, who has declared her candidacy and not just an exploratory committee.
Give us the state of play. I mean, we've seen so many Democrats coming and going. We're waiting for one big name, who I know Jordan Phelps is also very familiar with. But once Joe Biden kind of decides, is this pretty much it? Is that list going to be?
Oh, I think we're still expecting a few more. Look at the map. There are still a few Democratic governors who are weighing options, and even a few members of Congress who are still flirting with the idea. Obviously, the big headline we're tracking this morning was Beto O'Rourke's huge fundraising numbers.
Big numbers.
Brought in more money than even Bernie Sanders, who had the last record for the first 24-hour first day haul. The former congressman is getting a little bit of flack from Democrats for not releasing any details of this big number. He hasn't said how many individual donors or the size of the average donation. That's something that the other Democrats have really highlighted in the past as they try to shine a spotlight on small dollar donors with the idea that everyone can be involved in giving to campaigns and funding campaigns. But nonetheless, it was just a huge number.
A huge number. Huge crowds in Iowa over the weekend. It's the first time he's ever been in Iowa. Getting a lot of press coverage, but a lot of critical press coverage. I've been struck in watching some of the news headlines here. He's had to apologize about his comments about his wife. Apologize about appearing on the cover of Vanity Fair saying he was born to do this. What do you make of the fact that he's getting a lot of press, making a lot of money, raising a lot of money, while also certainly being scrutinized pretty negative?
Yeah, the national spotlight can be hot and tough. Clearly there's enthusiasm around him and his candidacy. You don't bring in numbers like that if you don't have people around the country that are excited to support you. But nonetheless, it's true. When you have cameras and reporters asking questions, voters asking tough questions, it means that those answers get harder and harder. And he's going to have to show that he is ready to govern, has a vision for governing, and not just a vision for campaigning.
Yeah, a lot of questions about where are your specifics out there.
But I was struck by those visuals of him running a 5K. Yeah. He's out there jumping on trucks and tables. He's clearly trying to show that he is young and vibrant and ready.
Maybe he's trying to draw a contrast with Joe Biden.
There's also definitely been this interesting feminist argument against Beto O'Rourke, that he's been able to come in and kind of have an easier go of it than some of these female candidates that have announced. And we've already seen him, apologize for making this lighthearted joke that his wife has raised his kids so much because he's been so busy. So it's interesting to see women kind of taking him on.
You've covered Joe Biden as well. We sort of alluded to it at the beginning. You spent a lot of years covering Joe. He was out there over the weekend in Delaware at a fundraiser, got a lot of buzz. What some have called a slip of the tongue. I don't know. Joe Biden's a pro. He said, that he was the most progressive candidate running. Well, wait a second. Would-be candidate. Jordan, what's your read on Joe Biden? He certainly seems like he's in it. What's your gut sense tell you?
He certainly seems like he's in it, Devin. But with Joe Biden, as long as there's a 1% chance he might not run, we've seen him be here before, and we've seen him change his mind. Last time, I remember literally watching the leaves change colors in front of his house, waiting to see if he was going to announce. And we seem to be in a stakeouts. Yes, we seem to be in a similar waiting game here. So I do think he's going to get in this time. But the question, of course, Devin, is has he missed his moment?
Yeah, we will see. Great to have you, Jordan Phelps, White House reporter. And finally today, the Supreme Court sort of hangs over all of these 2020 festivities. And I was up at the court today for a major case coming out of Virginia, this one involving racial gerrymandering allegations. The Virginia House of Delegates redrawing the state's map. This is back in 2011. Right. Mary Alice, you're familiar with the case. And they have been accused of using race in a disproportionate sense to draw those boundaries, pack African Americans, so to speak, into a select handful of districts to diminish, as the allegation goes, their influence in the election. The court's now really seeming to grapple with the role of race in drawing boundaries. They have to use race when drawing the boundaries. That much the Voting Rights Act requires. But then you have this thing called the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, where you can't actually use race to discriminate against people.
Right.
So it's a balancing act.
Exactly. And the idea of using race to determine the fairness of a map was originally done to make sure there was proper representation for minority groups, not as in a way to disenfranchise minority groups. And that's what is being alleged here. You know, it's important to remember, too, that the Virginia State House is just
so
razor
narrow.
and thin, right? Republicans have this teeny majority, and so any change to that map would have big implications in a key swing state. But also whether or not this case will have big implications in other states, where Democrats in particular have said that they feel like there are maps that are unfair. But it's important to note it's not just Democrats. We've seen these accusations of unfair maps on both sides, and I think that as the courts weigh in a big way about what is fair and what is not fair, we're going to have to see a lot of new maps redrawn.
Or stay out of it. This case involves racial gerrymandering. We know that next week at the Supreme Court, 2 big cases, one out of Maryland, one out of North Carolina, will deal with can politics be used to draw the maps? When is it unconstitutional to consider politics when drawing congressional maps? The justices will hear those arguments. We know they've been skittish, particularly in this polarized political time, to get involved. We will see next week, so it should be some fireworks up there at the court. It will be fun. That's all we have today here in the briefing room. Great to have you with us, Mary Alice. I know you were manning the ship last week here while I was away.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much. Thank you for watching us here, 3:30 Eastern Time every day this week. Download the ABC News app for the latest on these and all today's big stories. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you next time.